Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on this panel discussion. My name is Ray Walsh. I am an independent consultant based in Prague. Last few years, I've been specializing in internal communications and specifically localization and, it's what I'd call operationalizing content. That's quite a word. Before I introduce our speakers today, I want to go over just a couple of points about the session. I want to let everyone know that this is the final webinar in what has been a series on internal communications and technology. This is being recorded, and like all the other previous sessions, that will be available on YouTube as well as on the Inco Club's website. So as a participant, it's up to you if you turn on your camera and if you identify yourself by name, but you should know that it is visible or will be visible to people who view the recording later on. During the webinar, chat is open, so you're welcome to comment and ask questions, and we're planning on making time for those questions toward the end of the session. So please feel free to speak up at any time. I'm really pleased about the panel and the whole group that we have assembled today, because I believe it's representative of the future for internal communications, or at least what I hope is the future for internal communications. A lot of the leaders in internal communications tend to come from the US and the UK, and as such, they tend to be focused on the Anglosphere. But the group we have assembled today, I think our guests specifically, they offer perspectives from regions that corporations sometimes call Central and Eastern Europe and APAC, and I think we need more of these voices in our profession's leadership. And so the first one I'll introduce is our first speaker, Agata Mazepus, an internal communication specialist with Ernst & Young, or as I learned on Wikipedia today, that's simply EY. Agata, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. EY is a multinational professional services network headquartered in London. Agata, thank you for being here today.
Sure, thanks for inviting me.
Our second guest is Anisu Fergis. I met him fairly recently. He's the author of Internal Communications, Insights, Practices, and Models. And he recently earned a PhD in Organizational Communication from Alliance University. Anisu, thank you for being here too.
Thank you for inviting me to the show.
I'm going to start off with a question. We're generally moving toward, looking ahead to the future of internal communications as we see it. But I want to start with the recent past. And in just a few years ago, on places like LinkedIn, I heard a lot of leaders in our profession talking about the need for us to generalize, to learn more widespread set of skills. And they were talking specifically about taking photos, photo editing, taking video editing, social media, all of these things, because we needed to be, a jack of all trades, be able to do everything. So I wonder what your opinion is, how that's been going. How have we been doing with learning new skills? And does that tell us anything about how we need to learn skills for the future? Agata, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So my feeling on this is what I would prefer is a bigger specialization in the field, because I feel like it is really difficult to have all these skills that are required for the job as internal communicator. And I was actually reflecting by just writing down all the tasks or types of tasks that I'm sometimes required to do. And I think that it's not a fair expectation to have of internal communicators to be able to do all of them at a very high level. But on the other hand, I think that it is good to have all these skills in the perspective of the future and to have more agile approach and to think in this kind of ways, because what my manager told me once is that when she was studying, let's say 20, 30 years ago, she was told not to learn how to type because she's going to have an assistant who is going to do it for her. And the thing is that we have no idea how the future will look like. And maybe it's good to pick up some of these technical skills that are now on the rise for us as internal communicators, because who knows how our profession is going to look like. So me personally, I try to have as many skills as possible in the area of internal comms, from writing, which is, I think, one of the most basic skills that you need as internal communicator, to things like basic graphic design and some coding and so on. But at the same time, I try to find my specialization and try to learn in some specific direction. And because we have no idea where this field will go. I've heard at many webinars that internal comms is now where marketing used to be like 20 years ago. I've heard this phrase so many times, and many people predict that it's going to go in this direction of being more data-driven and so on. But what will actually happen? I don't know. Did I think that 1 year ago I would be 1 year ago before the pandemic? Did I think that I would be dealing with crisis communication like most of my time? Not really. So I would love to see more specialization, but honestly, I'm a bit skeptical, especially in the context of our region, where, let's be fair, there's not much resources as at this point still pumped into internal comms. And very often people who are having the hats of internal comms, people also have many, many other different hats. So yeah, I'm a fan of specialization, but am I sure it's gonna go in this direction? No, not really. I'm not 100% sold on that.
Anisu, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and I echo what Agatha was saying, that the fact that there is so much of expectations of internal communicators today, it's a good sign, but we need to be also very pragmatic and practical that we can't be everywhere and we can't do everything that's expected of us. So there has to be a certain balance, and I think going back to the core of what internal communication is really, I think, is about connecting people, engaging, being the custodian of the brand, internal brand, helping create advocates of the brand from inside. I think that should still be the fundamental areas which we need to focus on. While these additional skills which come in, yes, like Agatha said, you need to think of ways in which you can have an extended group of people who can probably help you, be it outsourced or insourced. And one of the models which we have used very effectively is we try to involve as many employees who have these skill sets, be it design, be it photography, videography, and take their partner with them to make some of this come alive. And therefore it doesn't have to be us all the time, and at some stage we can even extend that impact by coaching people, teaching people how to write effectively, teaching people how to do video and other stuff, so that they can be more effective in what they do. So it doesn't really have to be our skill. So I would still think that we should stay specialist and not generalist.
I think a lot has to do, if I could just throw in just a quick remark here. Most of my clients are large global companies, and they can afford a certain amount of specialization. But I'm an independent consultant, and if I want to promote myself, I have to be in social, I have to do YouTube videos, and this has been a learning curve for me. I am a writer by training, and even to this day, putting together a PowerPoint that looks good is still a challenge for me. I know how to tell a story. I can do the verbal part, no problem. But and because we're in such an interconnected digital world, I can now, thankfully, I can turn to people, like even through something like Fiverr, and I can get those slides looking good. Having said that, it was very helpful for me to do my own YouTube video and add subtitles. And it took me ages, and I plan to do more one of these days. But it was a good, just at least so that I know what's possible, what it takes to get it put together. I think that makes me a more informed practitioner, even though I really don't want to get involved in video editing if I can help.
Absolutely. That's a great point.
So it's kind of a similar question. You look at job descriptions today, there are certain words that constantly come up that I see: writing, presenting. I think we all, as internal comms people, that's probably why we got into this profession in the first place. We were attracted to those things, and we probably know how to develop those skills. But also in there is persuasion and negotiation, and they're continually in there. And I wonder what that means to you, and how can we invest in those skills? How do we go about developing them? Anisu, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, these skills. So again, if you step back and understand what are the expectations of an internal communications team, and so the expectations from a skills perspective. So there are skills, there are competencies, there is knowledge, and so when you try to understand what really works and what's really required to be a strategic internal communicator, then you would know that the fundamentals and the basics like writing is important. You need to be having those persuasion skills. You need to be able to negotiate, with your stakeholders. So therefore, those are foundational to any internal communications team, internal communicator. So I would think that, yeah, those skills need to be there. But then over and above that, I think you'll need to start also thinking of how can you be a better advocate internally? How can you kind of look at different issues which are within the business and be a problem solver, be a thinker beyond just the specific domain of internal communication. So I would think that those are important to have. So there are certain skills which are foundational. There are certain skills which are more advanced. And as you progress in your career as a professional, you would need to start building those skills. And those skills can come in by learning on the job, going through trainings, workshops. In fact, one of the things which I've noticed in an organization in India where they have sent their entire leadership team and communicators to a literary workshop or literary fest where they wanted them to understand storytelling better. So you learn it from authors, you learn it from people who are in drama and theater and art, and that's where you build some of those skills. It can't be taught in-house all the time. So you need to go out there, expand your horizons, and learn a lot more. So that's how I would see it.
Agata, how do you see that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Soft skills are so crucial, so-called soft skills. And I see that Diana's comment that you need to negotiate with the management and persuade them that your suggestions make sense. But on the other hand, you also need the skills to persuade your management that their ideas may not necessarily make sense. And this is an extremely difficult skill, especially when you work with senior leadership and guiding them in the right direction. I think that this is something that is undervalued in internal communications, and we should put more stress on it and on developing these skills. Because also I feel like this is the reason why maybe we are such generalists very often, because I find that internal communicators very often are super helpful people who want everything to be great and to support as much as possible. But sometimes we have to say no. No is a very short word, but a very difficult word to say. And I think that assertiveness, persuasion, negotiation are really probably even more important sometimes than hard skills like writing or design and other things like that. So definitely, I think that we need to invest more time and resources in that.
Yeah, I've always presented it a little bit that the legal department doesn't have to justify its recommendation, and the finance or the accounting department don't have to stand up for their views, but we have to defend what is our recommendation. So I think we require probably even more negotiation than some of these other business areas.
Exactly, and I really hope for the future for more maybe standardization of what internal comms is, because I feel like it is very often misunderstood, and maybe I feel maybe during the pandemic it changed a little bit. We got a little bit more recognition, but I still feel like sometimes in some cases internal comms can be treated more like a production center, and the value of strategic advising and consulting is not taking that much into account, and it's not appreciated as much as it really should be, because I think that this is the most important part of having great internal comms in a company.
Well, let me stick with you, Agata. That brings up my next question. All the internal communications teams that I've been with, and generally, again, these are global companies, large headcount, but their internal communications function operates like a kind of newsroom, and they're still very focused on either newsletters 20 years ago or intranet content or emails. So let's look forward into the future. And Agata, do you see that evolving or changing in the future?
I honestly hope so. I find that a lot especially in big organizations, a lot revolves around leaders' egos, and a lot of the outputs are actually not thinking about the big picture and about really engaging the employees and looking at the data and like making sure to actually have an impact, but rather to just use internal comms as someone who is going to edit and put in a nice template thoughts of somebody who just wants to send it out because they have to, or because they feel that they have to. And I feel like it's changing, but very slowly. I think that the good thing is that the generational change in when it comes to employees is that people are seeing through things, and they are not afraid to speak up, and they are not afraid to call out when something is, for example, useless or not needed, and they are more clear in defining their needs as employees. And I really hope that leadership sees it. And here's also where I see the role of us as internal communicators, to amplify these voices of employees, and instead of being this news production rooms, to actually listen to employees and serve the employees, because I think that this is ultimately our job, to make sure that employees are happy and engaged.
Well,
Anisu, do you see this newsroom mindset evolving?
Yeah, I mean, I believe I'm a strong advocate of tapping the potential and power of employees as advocates, and therefore I feel that, and if you even look at some of the research which has been done, even the Arthur Page Society clearly says that every employee is in some form involved and responsible for communications. So we can't take away from the fact that everyone has a say in communication. Of course, we can control some part of the narrative, but I think the future, all employees need to be involved in terms of how you shape and curate the narrative. Again, one example which I can share is in my organization, what we do is we have an extended team of volunteers from employees, which is like a brand council, where we invite them to share their perspectives. We test a lot of our communication through them before we roll it out company-wide. We involve them in, like I said, in production of a lot of our internal content. And again, of course, in partnership with us. But it builds a lot of engagement. It builds a lot of alignment, because people feel that, yes, they are having a say in how communication is done. And what's interesting is we've even created a podcast which is created by employees, produced by them, and published by them. And so that kind of content is readily accepted by other employees because it's coming from people. So that's a model which I think will be in the future. You can't control and be one centralized newsroom. You need to have the ability to let go and the willingness to accept that all employees can be partners in this journey.
Yeah, I like that. And breaking down that wall also reduces the propaganda feel for our content.
Absolutely.
So related to that, what about the comms team structure? How do you see that being structured in global organizations? And I guess I mean by that, where are they sitting, both literally and figuratively in the organization? Right. And I guess since you were just talking about that, but Anisu, could you continue on that?
Absolutely. No, so I think you're right. So again, there is this model that you can't have the central team dictating how things need to be done globally, because each of the locations, each of the geographies has their own cultural understanding and nuances, which are very important to appreciate. And by holding it centrally, it doesn't really work. So at one level, you should have some kind of governance which manages what is needed to be said and how it needs to be said, but then you need to involve the local markets, and therefore the model needs to be more decentralized from that perspective. There needs to be more involvement in understanding and listening to people. I think that's something which I see lacking in a lot of organizations, where they don't really appreciate and understand what's happening on the ground, and therefore they are missing out on a lot of key instances, which means that downstream there are a lot more issues which you're trying to tackle, because if you're not trying to understand and appreciate it upstream, then obviously when you're rolled out the program, then you're going back and trying to see why it didn't work and what can be done to overcome some of the issues. So I think fundamentally that model is something which needs to be rethought, and believe that even though a lot of companies still hold on to the central global versus a local model, but I think it needs to be broken down a bit further so that there's more autonomy, there is more ability and trust which is given to each of the local markets so that they can localize. And I know you're a big advocate of localization, and I think that is the way forward.
Right, right. I am a big advocate of that. I think it is the only hope for us, in my opinion. Agata, what do you feel about the structure of global organizations for IC?
Yeah, sure. So I will speak kind of against my role because at EY we have more or less four levels. So we have the global one, and then we have area, then we have region, and then we have local. I'm on the regional level. And I think that sometimes, even on the regional level, we are speaking too general. And we see 100% that whenever local communication goes out from a local, whether it is country managing partner or talent leader or anyone at all, actually, it has such better engagement rates, and people so much more prefer it rather to, like very generic things it's just impossible to be specific when you send things from a like more higher level in the structure, because things are different everywhere. And this was also something that we learned during the COVID pandemic, that we had to go as local as possible, even to the point of offices, because information was so different and changing so fast that we had to go as local as possible. And my hopes is that it's going to stay, and that more money and more energy is going to be put into the local level, because we just see that it works, that this is what employees appreciate the most. This is what they read the most. This is what they trust the most. Because it's the same like in media. Like I studied journalism, and this is something that we kept learning, that people, the more local news they receive, and the closer it is to them and to their situation, the more likely they're going to get engaged with it or be interested in it. And it's exactly the same in internal comms.
It still always frustrates me. We work so long on a piece of content explaining our B2C strategy, and we get all our top people to speak about it, and then we have specific examples. It's the best piece of polished content that we could possibly produce, and then a local piece on, hey, we had a party and there was cake, it gets 3 times the number of views. So a local just always resonates more. Does anybody have any questions on that? Does anybody before I go on to the next question, anybody want to add to that? Or I want to go back to these job descriptions, and another word that keeps popping up is coaching. I wonder how you define that, or where you see that's going into the future. Is that coaching need expanding? Is it changing in any way? Agata, do you have any views on how we are as coaches?
That's a really interesting one. I have not seen that in the jobs that I've applied for before. But actually, it could be a very useful skill. I mean, I think as someone with a journalistic background, that the job of a journalist is to ask questions, right? And maybe this is something that we need to do more also in internal comms. And this is essentially what coaching comes to, right? Asking the right questions and steering the conversation into right directions, and helping people discover some things, and engaging people into unlocking their thinking and so on. So I think that it's a very very interesting thing to maybe introduce, and as something that is in job descriptions for internal comms people. But coaching is so hard. It's not something so easy to learn. And again, another skill to add to this broad portfolio of internal comms people. I don't know. Anissa, what do you think?
Well, I think going by the definition of what coaching means, I think it's about helping the leader in this perspective inside the organization to solve their own business problems, and helping them kind of navigate how they communicate effectively. And I think there are a couple of barriers. One is, of course, the leader himself or herself needs to be open to being coached. Sometimes that comes in the way. The other is from the internal communicator standpoint. They also need to be credible enough. You need to have solid background. You need to have demonstrated that you are a really strategic thinker and capable enough to coach others. And that's when they will trust you more, because unless you have established yourself, there is very little chance that they will allow themselves to be coached. So just by establishing yourself internally and externally as a thought leader can go a long way in being perceived as a coach or being invited as a coach. And I think leaders really, really need a lot of coaching, is what I see, both in terms of how they articulate messages, how they present, how they write, how they address their teams. I think there are a whole lot of opportunities which internal communicators can definitely work on and support leaders.
Yeah,
It is a really good point. Coaching is a two-way relationship, and very often, you can't coach somebody if they don't want to be coached.
Exactly.
And I'm not exactly sure, to this day I still struggle with it, but if you've got a town hall that needs to be put together, you've got 5 speakers arranged, and you can see the day before that speaker number 3 needs needs to speak more directly to the audience. Is that leader willing to hear that advice or not? And I think that's something is always a struggle. So actually, as a follow-up to that, I mean, do you feel like there's more possibility for that in the future? Do you think that people are more willing to hear our expertise?
Well, I think the way I see it is that often when you bring a consultant from outside, there is a higher chance that they listen to that consultant. But when it's someone who's inside, there is a bit of resistance saying, okay, I know this person, so how much can the person tell me, and what can the person tell me that I must believe? So I think it's like I said, it's a bit of that credibility and how you establish that rapport and relationship, so that the person trusts you and then starts seeing it. And the other is, which I believe strongly, is you need to go with data. So if you show, for example, that this person's message was effective or not effective, you have ways to show that it can be improved. You go with data and insights and demonstrate that, yes, you can move the needle for them. That's when they start allowing themselves to be coached.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there is a road opening towards this approach, also hopefully internally, because I feel like at least this is how I see it from our standpoint, from Central Eastern Europe. That leaders are opening up more to listening and to actually receiving the advice from internal comms. I think that what has been happening in the internal comms area, so many great professionals, being more seen, for example, on LinkedIn and so on. And it really seems like this is becoming a topic that leaders are starting to understand. And I think that once some of them go on the side, then others will follow. There's been so many articles in business newspapers and magazines around internal comms in the past year, especially around like empathetic messaging and being inclusive leader and so on and so on. I think that we need to put more of these examples of how internal comms are helping leaders craft these messages, and hopefully it will lead to more and more of them coming to our side and being open to hear our advice.
Yeah, it's. I guess I can be critical of my countrymen. I'm American, if you haven't figured that out already. And when the American executives parachute into Europe, there's a kind of we're notoriously ignorant of the rest of the world. Although I would say our countrymen, our colleagues in the UK, are not much further behind us. So they tend to come in and they just speak in this American way, and they're telling everybody how we're one big family and all of these things that may not necessarily culturally resonate. And I wonder how we can get their attention before they start opening their mouths, but they really think about audience awareness and who they're talking to. I know my colleagues in PR, they'll create, if a leader is going to speak to the media, they'll create a whole briefing about all the things that might come up in this interview, all the questions and all their talking points on various topics. And the leader's supposed to use these talking points as much as they can when they're speaking. It might be good to create these briefings for them, if they're willing to read them, about who are they talking to, what are they talking about this week, this month, this quarter, what are the demographics, what kind of languages do they speak. I think these are all really important details for these leaders to know, but frankly, they need to be curious enough to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is also a role of global internal comms functions to help with that, because very often I see that that things that are coming from the top level, from global level, are very often unusable on a regional or local level. They just completely don't fit the situation that is happening. And sometimes we received, you see some global messages that are sent to the whole organization with kind of assumption that people will know about different events that are happening in the US or UK or whichever country is the global place. And but I really hope that they will open up to it, because diversity and inclusiveness is such a big topic. And I hope that it's not going to disappear anytime soon, and it's actually going to expand more also to the cultural sensitivity and cultural awareness, because it's really much needed.
Well, I would add that one way to kind of help them is also to, from a cultural standpoint, and I think Ray, you mentioned that there's something called the Hofstede cultural model, which anyone can just go online and you can get a clear understanding of how the locals understand or appreciate culture, and what are some of the things which you need to be aware of in religiousism, masculinity, femininity, all those kind of aspects. How open are they to engaging? What are some of the resistances? I think that basic reading of the local nuances will definitely help empower them more in terms of how they engage going forward.
Sometimes I welcome the focus on diversity and inclusion, but I'd really like it to be really diverse and inclusive. And I feel like D&I is often like, well, you're welcome to join the table as long as you think like us. You can be any color, any gender, anything, but you have to think like us. And that's where I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of organizations, that's as far as they can take D&I. Let's move on to technology. I have some questions about digital transformation, because the last 3-4 years, it's been every organization that I've touched has talked about digital transformation on some level. Now, on the one hand, maybe this is just sort of a trendy buzzword that's being used, and it's not something for us to consider for the long term. But I do think for the medium term, it's going to be here for a while. There's going to be a huge, wave of new technologies, and I think they're going to come faster and faster. And these are typically projects, like it could be something as small as a expense reimbursement tool, and it's cloud-based and it's software as a service, and it's being rolled out in the regions in stages. And very often these products, these services, come with a change manager. It's all built in, and they're implementing this change in the organization. And I guess this question could be posed from a perspective of a large organization or a small organization. But one question is, what is that change manager? And very often, on several projects, they come to me and say, okay, Ray, where's the change management plan? Because that's communications. So I wonder, from as long a term perspective as we can possibly do here, what is our role in this digital transformation, and what is our interaction with these change managers?
Well, if I could take that, Agatha, is that okay?
Go ahead.
All right. So I think so. It's interesting that you mentioned that these tools come in pre-packaged with a change manager, because at least in the roles I've played, I've now seen that happen. It's always the communications team which takes the ownership of making sure that the system or the tool or the platform is implemented end to end, and it's also accepted by team members. So that's how I've seen it in work. But again, going by the pandemic and the fact that now everyone is digital, and that's going to be the way which we function. So I don't think selling change is going to be very difficult in terms of implementing or getting the system or the platform in place. It's about getting people to start using it in the right way. I think that's really fundamentally what I've started to see, where be it a Teams or be it any other Google Hangout or Trello or whichever platform that companies use, it's always about what is the level of acceptance, what is the level of usage, what's the level of engagement on it. And what I've seen work is when leaders and managers are active on it, that's when team members also start participating, because sometimes it feels like, oh, if I'm on internal social media or internal network, I'm not being productive enough. And that's the mindset which managers drill down on their team members, at least in some parts of the world. And therefore, it's a bit of a cultural shift as well. While change happens, it's about ensuring that being on the platform, being engaged on internal social media is not wrong. It's actually helping productivity, is helping the organization be more successful and move forward. So I think that's how I would see it. But I think the role of change definitely rests with the internal communicator, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. Like we've just been at UI through a really big change when it comes to technology, because we just introduced new intranets this month. I lost track of time, to be honest. And implementing new technology, of course, it took a long time and so on, but we've been through similar processes before. So implementing the technology itself is not that hard and people are used to it. But changing the mentality, not only of employees, because the new internet comes with a big change that you have to search for information. You're not going to be fed information anymore. This is the trick, that people are not used to it. We have to stick to our goal to actually have people transform their mindset, and we need leaders, and we need all the teams that we work with also to be on board, because I've been through so many of similar projects before, when the first data that is coming in and the levels are dropping down, and suddenly let's revert to email. No, let's not do that. Here comes again the assertiveness and saying no, and persuasion. We really need to, I think, as internal communicators, it is really a big part of our role to be implementing change and to deliver change. And especially in the aspect of like the cultural change and behavioral change, for sure.
Well, I would just add that so you made an interesting point that people tend to revert back to an email when things don't work. It's also, I think, there's an opportunity for internal communicators to show that the systems work. So they may even want to take some test groups and pilot of some teams which are doing really well, some best practices, and share it and show data again to say that yes, there is proof that the system works. Maybe it's not working in your respective business or team, but is working elsewhere. So there is definitely something which is going right. And why don't you look at how you can leverage some of those best practices in your team? So I think that a bit of leaderboard sharing, dashboard kind of an approach might definitely change ways in which people approach digital.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Another aspect that's interesting to me about all these digital transformation projects is how global they are. I want to ask you about, the employee experience is increasingly global, and I'm wondering if that has any impact on our profession. I'm just speaking for myself. In the last 3 years, I've had more interaction with colleagues in India than the rest of my career combined, and I think that's probably here to stay. Do you have any thoughts on the employee experience getting increasingly global?
Well, yeah, I think it's, while I would say that at some level there are some commonalities for employees, and again, like Agata was mentioning about different generations at the workplace, and therefore what they have expectations from the organization will vary, and that might cut across the globe. But when it comes to the local market, again, the employee experience will vary based on the the HR practices or the employee policies that they have. So there are everything. So I think from an internal communication standpoint, you need to see the employee experience from the time they join till the time they leave, and all the different touch points, and what are the ways in which you can keep reinforcing the messaging that this is a great company, you made the right choice, we have your back, and we are looking after you, and we make sure that you can do your job effectively. I think those are some of the messages which need to be articulated all through the journey. So I think I would think that the employee experience perspective is definitely evolving. People are more vocal about what they want inside organizations and outside. So if they see a leader or an organization not being ethical, or not being environmentally conscious, or not being having a social purpose, they tend to voice it out much more. And therefore, organizations need to be mindful of that and try to tackle it more tactfully inside the organization than wait till it becomes a big blown social media crisis.
Yeah, I would second that, and I think that we are getting. I have a similar experience to you, Ray. Like working in the past year with people from not just India, all across the globe, really, and I think that people really appreciate this experience, and it is a big part of it. And I think that, as you mentioned, Anisu, with the globalization of the employee experience, also the global problems and global stances like sustainability, which is a huge issue that new generations really voice their opinions on, or again diversity, inclusiveness, and so on. This is definitely impacting employee experience. But still, the local level is absolutely vital with all the things related to the experience that you get at the local level. But I'm at the same time really happy to see the global making an impact here.
I hope so. I think it's a good. Well, it's a good thing for my country spiritually to get engaged with the rest of the world. But I think it's good for companies, and I think it certainly makes the world a more interesting place. We're in the last quarter of our hour here, and I do going to get one question in. It's a little bit long-winded, but bear with me. It's related to our relationship with technology. So I was doing some interviews with Jerry McGovern and Alan Porter, and they mentioned how broken intranets are generally, and every company that I trying to watch my words here, but I've seen a lot of bad intranets. I've heard a lot of people complaining about their intranet, and specifically search is often broken. You can't find anything on it. So you bookmark pages that are useful to you, and you just don't really use the online portal experience. And on all of the CMS systems that I've been trained on, the person invariably, when you get to the point where you're attaching metadata like tags or anything else, to the content, they say, "Oh yeah, we don't really use that," and then they just post the article. So we've been given, even if we don't like our intranet, it's still much more sophisticated than we really use it, and then it turns out if you follow that, if you don't apply metadata year after year after year, you end up with a broken intranet. Now, I'm not saying it was our decision to have this bad intranet product, and we are more or less stuck with it, but we contributed to its lack of functionality in some way because we didn't actually explore all of its technical capabilities. So my question is, how can we prevent that in the future? We're going to have new technologies thrown at us increasingly faster. How do we get in there and figure out what it can do? What do we have to learn? How can we go about it so that we don't make those kind of mistakes going forward?
Yeah, it's so easy to break an intranet. I've seen it happen so many times already. I think that that the thing is that we very often don't do things right from the beginning, and we don't. We jump into things when it comes to technology and just start using it without really thinking through what is our long-term goal. And we think, if it breaks, we're just going to get a new one. Maybe it's time to shift the thinking and to really not only think about implementing the technology, not only about thinking about changing the behaviors of our people and of our leadership, but also maybe changing our behaviors and our approach to things, and really starting to think long term about the tools that we are using, the impact that we want to have, and everything else that surrounds internal comms.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, and I think there are two aspects to it. The first is I think internal communicators need to have a seat at the table to ensure that when decisions around technology which are impacting communications are made, that's when we should have a voice to say what is suitable for our employees based on solid research, which says, okay, this is the demographics, this is what employees expect, this is the kind of tool we need to be more productive, to be more collaborative. So I think those goals and objectives need to be articulated and set up front. And unless you have a seat at the table, it'll always be a technology team or some other person who takes the call, and then you're stuck with either intranet or a bad, design which you can't use. The other aspect is about user experience. And like you're saying, some of the things are broken because before it gets launched, they haven't really done a usability test, or they haven't asked users, what is it that you would like to get out of the intranet or the enterprise social network? And therefore, if you tackle that upfront, you will be able to place some of the right information on the screen on the top of the navigation bar so that they can access it right up front. And I've done this in the past where we have done usability tests before we launched intranets, and almost 60 to 70% of the mistakes which happen downstream are caught ahead of time, and that reduces a lot of company money. It reduces a lot of our time, and therefore we can free that time to do better stuff for ourselves as well as for the company. So I think it's important to take these two angles. One is get a seat at the table and influence that decision right up front, and then ensure there is user experience and usability testing done in a way that it does not create chaos downstream.
It's a very good point. That brings us back to that point of negotiation and
Yes.
and really standing up for for what's right here. I don't know how to build this relationship with IT, but I think it's really important on an ongoing basis, because I think, I have seen those kinds of usability testing or focus grouping, but it's done as an exercise at the very last minute. And that it's like, regardless of what this focus group tells them, they're not going to make any changes. They've got their implementation date. They just want to tick the box in their project plan that they had a focus group. But somewhere in there, we've got to really stand up for, to really make this an international implementation, to stand up for these focus groups and actually react to what's being said. And I think I can't remember what agency it was in the UK. I might have been Scarlett Abbott. I can't remember, but it was a webinar, and they were advocating, really sit down with IT before they do these implementations and find out about functionality and how that's going to be used and how IT wants it to be used. Frankly, what do they envision for this thing? And they said specifically with Microsoft products, it's possible if you're not ready for that functionality yet, then you can ask them to switch it off and roll it out at a later date. And I thought, oh, you can do that? I didn't know there was, but you can't know about that until you're actually having an ongoing conversation with IT, not just at the decision-making table, but really, really be there for all of at the various milestones of the project.
Absolutely.
We're getting down to the last few minutes. Does anybody in the group have any thoughts on this or any questions of their own they'd like to ask?
I have a question. Because hearing all the thoughts that you shared, I'm actually wondering, what should the onboarding of an internal comms person look like, so that we don't, like when we join a new company, we don't fall into a couple of traps that might be there waiting for us. For instance, working with a broken intranet and adding up, to it being even more broken, or, like becoming a production center before you manage to, like establish yourself as a thought leader or something like that. So what is your recommendation? What do you think? Like, let's, like the sky is the limit right now today when we think, what would an ideal onboarding for an internal comms person look like, so that we're able to work as we'd like to?
Agatha, do you want me to start?
Go ahead. Yeah, I have to think about it.
All right. So I think that's a great question, because not many people think about what's the ideal way to welcome internal communicators. I think the first step is, of course, to make them feel welcome inside the organization. And I think that experience before joining is as important as the experience when they join. So just as a manager, staying in touch, explaining what you can look forward to when you join, and what are some of the ways of working, and all that can be established a bit upfront. But when they join, I think it's fundamental that they get immersed in the business, because if they are not aware of what's happening in the business, they're not clued into the local nuances, then it's going to be very difficult for them later to negotiate and influence and get partnership. So that's very crucial. The other is, of course, the hands-on work and experience, giving them something to start working on, because it's a lot of theory and a lot of perspectives which are thrown at them at the start, and then they when they really hit the ground, they may not be really aware of where to start and what to do. So there has to be probably a 100-day plan to ramp them up. And this 100-day plan would include, of course, things like meeting all the right stakeholders, ensuring that they are well connected. There's a mail which goes out, introducing them. So I think those are the hygiene factors which need to be considered before. And I think that would make that welcome or the introduction really smooth, according to me.
Yeah, I can say what not to do for onboarding from my personal experience. Don't leave them be. Don't let the stakeholders take your internal comms person over and make them, get stuck into many different tasks. I think that managers in internal communications have a big role here into first really having the person understand the company priorities and the strategy, but also communications and engagement strategy and priorities, as well like employee value proposition and so on. So I think cover all the strategic basics first before you send them to the stakeholder. There is enough time. They managed without this person for a few weeks. They will manage a few more. First, make sure you cover all the tracks and make sure that the person understands what is within their role and what isn't, because once if they don't say no once, it will be much harder to say no later. So from my personal experience, mistakes to avoid in onboarding of internal comms person.
I think that's a really good, very good point to bring out what should not be done, because there are a lot of bad onboarding. I've experienced them personally. And I agree with Anisu as well. Get the grounding in the business is really important. And I think it can be done badly where you're just getting a series of presentations in the first week and it all just maybe space them out, so that they can actually take in some information and then consider another business unit. Getting them connected to the business is really important. And I think that that's especially important if the internal communications team is dispersed around the world. So I remember a team we were on, it was always a struggle getting somebody in the UK. The hiring level was usually somebody who's just starting out in their career, and that person really needed to be strong with leadership. And of course, the power dynamics of someone who's 30 years in the industry versus someone who's just out of university, it's, and then very quickly that person ends up being the typing pool for HR. Empowerment, I think, is really important. I think advocating for that person so that doesn't happen, I think, is really important. And I think maybe, especially for those younger hires, is to, inspire them, hopefully, with what's the vision for the department and the function over the next 5 years, and can they imagine themselves in that picture somewhere, so that when they're having that meeting with that leader, they might be able to say, well, we're trying to move away from email or whatever. They might be able to stand up for a position that they feel that the department is behind them, the function is behind them, even if they're working in that office alone.
Absolutely. I think I would add also that you need to probably give them a mentor and a buddy so that they can navigate the system, because there are a lot of organizational politics which need to be thought through and understood. And unless someone can guide them through this, they'll be just lost in that space.
Yes, and give them the list of acronyms, because when I joined EY for the first month, I did not understand anything.
That's true.
Including EY. I remember when my first job was with a consulting company, and there was a guy from the Southern United States, and he said, I used to work for E&Y. I was new to the corporate world, and I did E&Y. What's an E&Y? It turns out it's his regional pronunciation. Yeah. E and Y is what he was saying. Well, I want to thank you both for being here, and for anybody who's listening to the replay of this, I just want to urge you that there's a lot of internal communications talent outside of the Anglosphere. So, on the Inco Club website and on LinkedIn, you should be able to see links to these people's profiles. I urge you to look at their work, look them up, make connections with them. And I also, being this is the final webinar, at least for this series, I'd really like to thank the founders of Inco Club, Diana and Susanna, for all the hard work they've done putting this together. It's been quite valuable, and I love having this kind of beachhead set up, outside the Anglosphere.
Fantastic! Thank you so much for inviting us to this program, and very delighted to share our perspectives.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.